Okay, so I said I was going to talk about the steps, some of the challenges, and the way I look at the steps today. When I started step one, I'll go through them, and hopefully around two or a little bit after two, I'll be done, and then we'll have questions and answers for the next half hour or so. So we started step one, obviously. And step one says I admitted I was powerless over alcohol, that my life became unmanageable. And like I said, when I first started, the way I looked at that is a lot different than the way I look at it today. I looked at it that when I drank, I was powerless over alcohol. So what I need to do is stay away from the first drink. And, because of my drinking, the way I was living, my life was unmanageable. Today, I've come to find out that step one is actually a 4-part step. Had no idea. Had absolutely no idea. Part one is exactly what I said. If I take the first drink, I'm off and running as an alcoholic. Okay, like my friend that I loved. This was 2 months ago, that passed away, took the first drink and passed away. I take the first drink, I'm off and running. So that's part one. But part two is I'm powerless over alcohol when I don't drink. And that's what I read early on in my talk today, that as an alcoholic, after I stop drinking, that's when I have problems with personal relationships. In fact, I remember when Bob first came in my life and he showed me that line from page 52 that says I have problems with personal relationships and I'm a pride of misery and depression and full of fear and all that. And I said, wait a minute, Bob, that's drinking. That's not sober. And he said, no, you wait a minute, Ron. I told you never to lie to me. And you told me that you were a blackout drinker, that 95% of the time when you drank, you blacked out and you came to a day later or 2 days later or whatever. Now, was that the truth or did you just make that up? I said, no, Bob, it was the truth. I said, that's the type of drinker I was. He said, then let me ask you a question. He said, what problems with personal relationships did you ever have drunk? He said, you weren't there. But how do you do now that you're sober? How do you do when you're in a meeting? And again, it's true for me, and I assume it's true for everybody on the call. But how do you do when you're in a meeting if you get called on to share and somebody with more time or more juice in the meeting corrects you? Do you want to go up and give them a hug and say, oh, thank you so much for helping me? Or do you think, who the hell are you to correct me in front of everybody? So, I had to learn that I'm thin-skinned afterwards, that I'm restless, irritable, and discontented afterwards. And if I stay that way for a long enough amount of time, I'll drink again because that fixes me. Okay. I'm married to a codependent. As I told you, next month, July 23rd, we're married 50 years. I heard Ann do a talk one time when she was a member of Al-Anon. I was hysterical with it. I met her. She was 16 years old. 16 years old. We're living in New York. I'm a hippie back then, okay? I was 18 years old. I pick her up. This is, I think, our third date or something. And a bunch of us went to this Holiday Inn, walk-up thing, about 10 of us. We figured we'd party there because we were kids. None of us had an apartment or anything like that. So we go there. It's the middle of the winter. We got to get the girls home. It's like 11, 12 o'clock. And we all come walking down these steps that were icy because it was the middle of the winter in New York. And I slipped on one of the steps and I just bing, 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 ding down the steps. And I'm laying at the bottom, stoned out of my mind, blood coming down my face from falling down these steps. And I heard her say this, and this may show why we're still married 50 years later. But she picked up my head and she looked at me and she said, he's sick and I can really fix him. We're still together. So if I stay uncomfortable for a long enough amount of time, I'll drink. If she stays uncomfortable for a long amount of time, she wants to fix me again. So I'm powerless over alcohol when I don't drink it. And then part three, my life is unmanageable. That's because of the reoccurring ego that tells me you don't need to do these steps again today. All you need to do is pray in the morning and then take your life back and go do what you want to do for the rest of the day. No way. No way. My life is unmanageable today. I need guidance and direction. I have to quit playing God right now. And then part 4 comes from our 12 and 12, where it says, why all this insistence that every AA must hit bottom first? The answer is I won't do these things unless I hit bottom. I'll give them lip service. I'll go to a meeting, but will I really surrender? No, unless that bottom is in today. So it can't be from years ago. And if I have a problem that I can't get out of, I need a solution. So that leads me to step 2. Came to believe a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Now, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had never said a prayer in my life, not one. It wasn't that I was an atheist. I just didn't believe in anything. I was sober a couple of months. I heard a guy at a meeting to talk about the 3rd step, about having a problem turning his will and life over to the care of God. And he was talking with a guy at the Alano Club. It's called the 202 Club in Pasadena. But he was talking about having all these problems. He said, when I die, God's going to give me 100,000 years in purgatory in front of me. And after that, I got to burn for eternity in hell. How can I turn my will and life over to the care of God? And this guy said to him, he said, Richard, he said, if I thought that's what God was, he said, I not only wouldn't turn my will and life over to him, he said, I wouldn't even turn my back on him. He said, why don't you make up a God? Put down he's all powerful. Put down he loves you and he won't hurt you. Make up a list of however many things you want. Bring it back to me tomorrow and let's talk. Richard said, okay. And he brought the list back to the guy the next day. And Richard said, start praying to that instead of that other God that's going to get you and just see what happens. And then Richard said these magic words. He said, and I'm sober 11 years. And I thought, wow, I can do that. I can do that. And I did. I went home and I made up a list of things that if there's such a thing as God or a higher power, these were the things that I want. Now it's grown from there, and my relationship with God has grown from there. But I made a beginning. Today I've come to find out that for me, step 2 is a 3-part step. I never realized it. A lot of years later, when I'm in trouble, a lot of times today, it's because I lose step 2. Now, what do I mean by that? And what do I mean by I think if I work the steps in the day I'm in, that step 2 is a 3-part step. From 2 months sober to today, I have never lost the thought that there is a higher power, that there is some power in this universe that I believe resides within me and within all of us, okay? But I've never lost the thought that there is a higher power. But I'll tell you what I do lose sometimes. And I talk to a lot of the guys I sponsor about this when they get in trouble because they have the same problem I do a lot. And what that is I don't believe that God will help me with whatever's going on. In our 12 and 12, it says this. It says in our 12-step programs, in Alcoholics Anonymous, belief means reliance. Belief means reliance. So what happens to a person like me, it's on page 31 in the 12 and 12, if anybody ever wants to look it up. But what happens to a person like me is I start to rely on other things to make me okay. Okay? When I was working, I might rely on getting a promotion, or I might rely on getting X amount of dollars. If I need money, what I'll do is I've come to believe that if I need $5,000, if I only get this $5,000, I'm going to have peace of mind. Now, again, the 12 and 12 define sanity. It says sanity is defined as soundness of mind, which to me means peace of mind. Okay? So where I'll lose step 2 is I start to rely on other things. Okay. I told you I'm 72 years old. I got some health problems. My youngest daughter, 32 years old, she had a stroke. That's not easy. I love that kid. My oldest daughter's a practicing alcoholic, been in and out of AA for over 20 years. Okay. I'd give her my sobriety if she could stay sober. So I come to rely if my youngest daughter, now she's fine today, but when she had the stroke, if she's okay now, I'll be okay. Or again, when I was working, I'm up for a promotion or whatever it is, I come to rely that if only that happens, I'll be okay. I don't think God is the one that's going to handle this. I'm the one that's going to handle it. Or for me to be comfortable, I need whatever the outcome is. Any of you guys understand what I'm talking about? Yes? No? Yes? Yeah, okay. I see a bunch of heads going, yeah, okay. So that's the part I lose. I lose the fact that I don't think God's going to help me with what's going on in my life. Not that I don't think there's a higher power, but is he going to help me in what I'm doing? And then part 3 of step 2 is, how do I get there? How do I get there? Because again, in the 12 and 12, the last paragraph on step 2, it says, whether agnostic, atheist, or former believer, we stand together on this step. Now, that is not 3 people. It is not like Joe is one, Patrice from Oregon is another, and Yvonne is the third. Okay? It's not like one's an atheist, one's an agnostic, one's a former believer. Those are 3 ways that I can become. Why? I have something going on in my life, and I think God doesn't handle that. I'm in charge of that. That's an atheist. An agnostic. Maybe God handles my finances, but I got to take control here, and don't get me wrong, there's things we need to do. So I'm not saying that, but maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. That's an agnostic. Or I had all the belief in the world yesterday, but I lost it today. And that's part of the human condition. But I also believe that know that that's 3 ways that I can become. It says, whether agnostic, atheist, or former believer, we can stand together on this step. True humility and an open mind leads us to faith. So there's 2 definitions of humility in Alcoholics Anonymous. They both come out of the 12 and 12. One is on page 58, and it happens during the 5th step. And it says, humility is knowing who and what I am, followed by a sincere desire to become what I could be. The second one is the one that I use, and that's on page 72 of the 12 and 12, comes out of step 7. And it says, the basic ingredient of all humility is a desire to seek and then do what God wants. So how do I do that? I told you, when this guy, Bob, got a hold of me, Ann and I were heading to divorce court every other day. And he said to me something, and if I think we all have beliefs, and I'll talk about that in the 4th step. But he said to me, Ron, you have an idea or a belief as to the way a husband should act, don't you? And I said, yeah. He said, how's that working for you? I said, not real good. He said, is it fair to say God has an idea as to what a husband is and how you should treat your wife? I said, that's fair. He said, God lives within. Our big book says that. Deep down within every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It is only there that he may be found. That's that voice deep within that knows when we're doing right and knows when we're doing wrong. He said to me, God has an idea as to what a husband is. He said, I want you to do something before you walk in the house. He said, you drive home from work, you open the car door to walk into the house. He said, I want you to ask God how you should treat Ann. Not treat her the way you think you should. See what happens. To seek and do what I think my higher power wants me to do. That's not only at home. When I went to work, to seek and do what I think God wants me to do, to treat my clients the way I think God wants me to treat them, to treat the people I work with the way I think God wants me to do it. With what? An open mind. Now, I didn't know what an open mind was. My sponsor said to me, you know what an open mind is? I said, yeah, sure. He said, what do you think it is? And he caught me again. I said, okay, what is it? He said, I'm going to take it from the other side. He said, you have a closed mind. I said, what do you mean I have a closed mind? He said, you have an opinion about everything. He said, you think you're right about everything, no matter what it is. I said, well, I am right about everything, Bob. Showed him. He said, how's that working for you? He showed me. He said, an open mind. He said, a closed mind is when you think you need whatever to be okay. He said, an open mind is you have the possibility that you're going to let your higher power run your life. Run your life. You're going to trust with an open mind that this God has your back. There's not a person on this call, I don't care what program you're in, that hasn't had things that's been in this program, be it AA or Al-Anon, for a long time, that hasn't had seemingly bad things happen in our lives. When they happened, that years later we found out to be better than anything we could have ever planned on our own. So I have to have an open mind that I don't need whatever to be okay, that I'm going to trust that if I do what this power wants me to do, seek and do God's will, that things are going to be okay. And I do that in step 2 on a piecemeal basis. Then I get to step 3, and step 3 says that I'm become willing, or that I make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of whatever higher power, whatever God I think there is. Sorry about that. Hold on half a second. Okay. That I'm going to seek and do whatever I think my higher power wants me to do. My first hero in Alcoholics Anonymous, as I said, was Chuck Chamberlain. Chuck Chamberlain put step 3 perfectly. He said, what your will is anything that comes out of your mind, your thoughts, your hopes, your aspirations, and your dreams. Your life is your actions today. You're going to turn that over to the care of God. Now, again, it says in our literature that the entire program will rest upon how well and earnestly I've made this decision to do this. Okay? But what Chuck used to say is, if you're willing to turn your will and life over to the care of God, what that really means is that your life's not your business anymore. Your business is to do what your higher power wants you to do. His business is to take care of you. I know this is true for me. I say it a lot. I assume it's true for more than just myself on this call. But I can tell you, I am 72 years old. I have never in my life ever had a problem in my life at any time, drunk or sober, that I was not involved with. It has not happened. If I'm not part of the show, I don't have any problems. My problem is I look at a world and I say, oh, I need this to be okay. Financially okay, emotionally okay, relationship-wise okay, health okay. But if I'm willing to live like my life's not my business, that's something different. You know, our big book says that I have to quit playing God, that God is now going to be the director of my life, that I am his child. I'm to do what he wants me to do. I do what he wants me to do. I say the 3rd step prayer. I say it over and over and over and over. And I say it slowly, and I think about what that means to me. And I try to the best of my ability to be the man that God wants me to be, whether it's here in this meeting or when I get off the meeting. And it's a lot more important when I get off the meeting than what I'm doing here. Here it may help a few hundred people, but when I get off, am I really practicing this program? Am I really treating my wife, because she's the one that's in the house with me today, the way God wants me to treat her? Am I really trying to do this? And then I get up to step 4. And one of the things that people ask a lot, how do you know if you're doing God's will? It's a great question. How do you know if you're doing God's will? What was told to me is something that I think is fantastic, and I think it's true for everybody that's sitting on this call. I don't know 100% of the time if I'm doing what I think my higher power wants me to do. But I will guarantee you 100%, I always know what God doesn't want me to do. And I make sure I don't do that to the best of my ability. So then I get up to step 4 and I write an inventory. and I use the columns, and I write an inventory to the best of my ability. I'm not going to have a time to go through a whole, like it was a one-day workshop or a retreat or something like that to go through step 4. But I'm going to tell you something I came across about 15 years ago that I have added to my inventories, and they've really uncovered a lot of things, okay? And what that is when I write an inventory, I use it as a tool. I normally write at least 1 or 2 or sometimes even 3 inventories a year. And most years 1 or 2. And when I know I need an inventory is, do I have any secrets in my life? Today, do I have any secrets in my life? Do I have any resentments or people that annoy me? Do I have any fears in my life? How's my sex behavior? Now, I don't run around on my wife, but how am I treating her? Do I ever do things to make her jealous, or am I ever inconsiderate? Are there other people that I may have hurt? And this is the part that I added about 15 years ago. I heard a guy talking about this, and it opened up a can of worms for me that has really helped me a lot. It's called a principle inventory. The definition of a principle is a truth. Okay, it is a principle that if I take this pen and I drop it, it will hit the ground. Gravity is a principle, it's a truth. Well, think about this. Isn't it true that every person on this meeting has certain things that they believe that they know are the truth for them? That fair to say? Sure is. Do people have any beliefs that hurt them in their lives? And that opens something up for me. You know, how many people might be 50 years old and they grew up hearing, you're nothing, you're an idiot, your brother's smarter than you. When you go to work, you're never going to amount to anything. And they're 40 or 50 years old and they're still working for minimum wage because every time there's a promotion come up, they go, I'm an idiot. I can't make it, because they know that that's the truth. They have that belief. Okay. I'm going to talk about something that's kind of personal, but it's the best way I know to explain it. And when I put on one-day workshops, sometimes Ann will come with me, and she's given me permission to talk about this. When I was a kid, I was 15 years old. I grew up in this beach town. Like I said, I come from a good home. My best friend Gregory, his father and his stepfather were both violent alcoholics, and we're walking home from the boardwalk one summer night, and Greg explained to me, he said, or not explained, but he asked me, which he had asked at other times, he said, is it okay if I sleep over tonight? He said, my stepfather started drinking again. He was beating my mother when I left. I pulled him off her, I punched him, and I ran out of the house, and I'm going home for a beating, and I don't want one. So I said, sure. I said, we'll ask when we get home. We walk in my house, and before I could get any words out, my mother and father were sitting at the bar. Neither one is alcoholic, okay? But my mother and father are sitting at the bar having a drink, and they looked at him absolutely stone-faced, as white as a sheet, both of them, and said, Greg, you need to leave. We need to talk to Ron. And he leaves, right? And I go, well, what's up? And they said, look, we need to talk to you. And I think it was my father that explained. He said, look, your mother's having an affair with this guy. I'm leaving tonight. You're now the man of the house. You better, and you're the oldest, so you better not show any emotion, because you're a man and you need to take care of your brother and sister. Now, I learned a lot of things that night, and that's where most of our beliefs come from. Things we learn. One, I learned you never trust a woman. 2, I trust you never trust a man. Never let anybody get close to you. 1, it takes 2 to tango, so never trust anybody. 3, never let anything get real important to you, like a family, because they're going to break up anyway, and it's going to hurt too much. So now it's years later, okay? I'm married to Ann for a long time. Best of my knowledge, she hasn't cheated on me. I'm married to her. She says, I got to go to the store. I got to get something for the kids. I'll be home in a half hour. All of a sudden, she's late. You know what my belief system said? Yeah, I see the heads going, yeah. So I had to learn to inventory these different beliefs. I learned you never let people get close to you. I had a lot of people in my life. Nobody was close. You had no idea you weren't close to me. But the people that know me well know I love to joke. I got a great sense of humor, and I learned to keep you away through jokes and through humor. But everybody was at arm's length. You might think I'm close to you, but there's no way. It is not happening. So I learned a lot of things as a kid, and I learned a lot of things throughout my life. And I'm going to tell you something. Through writing principal inventories, what I call limited belief inventories, in the 15 years since, I have inventoried probably 75 different beliefs that I had that I knew, and I would have gone to the grave knowing they were true. And out of the 75, somewhere between 65 and 70 were not true. Absolutely not true. They were things that happened in my life, like this deal when I was 15 and my mother having this affair. That doesn't mean that everybody does that, but that's what my head says. That doesn't mean don't let anybody get close to you, but that's what my head said. So I had to learn to inventory these things, to be able to be more free in my own life. Things that I was so afraid to look at were no big deal. And then I look at step 5 and I share these things. And our big book is full of promises. I believe there are 96 different promises in the steps, from step 2 to step 12. 96 things that are going to happen through the steps. And that doesn't include what we call the negative promises. Those are just positive promises, like we read the 12 promises in the 9th step and so on and so forth. But there are also negative promises. There are also negative promises. And I haven't counted them. I should, since we're stuck in the house so often. But one of them is in the 5th step. It says if we don't do this step, inevitably we're going to drink again. So I had to learn to do 5th steps, and I do. I do thorough 5th steps. It also talks, I said, how do you apply these steps or how do I apply these steps in my life today? If you want to try it, try it. How do you apply the 5th step in your life today? How do I apply the 5th step in my life today? Our big book says this. It says, more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. A double life. I have my stage character that I want to present, but then I have the inner man. Do I have any secrets in my life? Am I the same person to everybody on here? That's the double life. Okay, do I walk around Mr. AA, or am I real to people? I try to apply that in my daily life, to not put out that stage character, to not be a reputation or whatever, but to be real to all people. When people do a 5th step with me, that talks about this in our 12 and 12. My sponsor after Bob died showed me something in the 5th step. It says, until I've told somebody my entire life story and had somebody do the same thing back, the feeling of belonging was never there. This was a guy, his name was Paul Martin, and at the time he was sober 50 years. I was sober 22 when Bob died. He said, you're going to do a 4th step, write a thorough 4th step, fly back here to Chicago, and we're going to do a 5th step together. I said, okay. He said, what that means is you're going to read me yours, I'm going to read you mine. There's people on this particular meeting that I sponsor, because I saw some of their names when I looked at the chat. They have heard my 5th step. We don't play, I'm here because I'm your sponsor and you're here and I'm going to give you absolution. Alcoholics Anonymous and any 12-step program, as far as I'm concerned, is equal sharing. One alcoholic or one Al-Anon sharing with another. I get as much out of the people listening that I sponsor listening to my 5th step as hopefully they get out of me listening to theirs, because I can get guidance and direction from them. So I do a thorough 5th step, and then I get up to step 6. And step 6 says I'm entirely willing to have God remove all of these character defects. And that means in the day I'm in. And I'll tell you, in my opinion, the operative word in step 6 is the word entirely. Am I entirely willing to have God remove these character defects? Because God doesn't drive parked cars. Why do I say the operative word and the most important word is the word entirely. I always use the same example of somebody saying, God, please make me honest. Please make me honest. My dishonesty is hurting my relationship at home. It's hurting my relationships at work. It's hurting my relationships with my friends and my kids. Please, God, make me honest. You know what, God? Do me a favor, though. Wait till April 16th. I just want to get my taxes done first. That don't count. That don't count. I have to be entirely willing to have God take these character defects. How do I do that? How do we do that? Is there anything I should do in step 6 or just become willing? I believe there's something to do. On the first page of the 12 and 12, it talks about the main character defect that any alcoholic on this call has. And anywhere, any alcoholic, the definition of a character defect is something I do I shouldn't do. Real simple. Something I do I shouldn't do. If I lie, I shouldn't lie. If I cheat, I shouldn't cheat. Okay? Whatever it is, something I do I shouldn't do. Well, the worst character defect I ever had was drinking. Almost killed me. Made me unemployed, unemployable, total loser in every area I could think of. Okay? Absolutely the worst. That character defect God took 43 years and 8 months ago. But what did I do to stop drinking? Did I just become willing? No, that was the beginning. That was the beginning. First thing I did is I put the bottle down. So if I'm a liar, the first thing I do is I stop lying. Next thing I did is I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I asked for help with that character defect. I've stayed involved in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I cleaned house as far as my drinking is concerned. What does that mean? I wrote an inventory. I did a 5th step. I made amends. I did these things and I continue to do them, and I haven't taken a drink. So that's the formula as far as I'm concerned in step 6 for getting rid of character defects. But again, the operative word to me is the word entirely. When do I need to work step 6? Today. The last paragraph in the 12 and 12 on step 6 says doesn't say God. It says I have to take action towards the removal of my grosser handicaps. So if somebody here, if Yvonne and I swapped the 5th step, and she listened to mine and she said, God, Ron, you got 47 character defects, right? But I'm going around the next day, and the only character defect I'm thinking of using is dishonesty. I'm going to tell a lie to somebody. Well, I'm not worried about the other 46. I'm worried about the lying right now. Am I really willing to give it up? Am I really willing to ask God right now to take care of that character defect? Because the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, in my opinion, and Al-Anon or any other 12-step program can only be practiced at one time, and that's right this second. It can't be practiced yesterday. It has nothing to do with today. I've got to be willing to be the person God wants me to be today, to surrender today and say, okay, I'm willing to be the man God wants me to be right now. And then I get up to step 7. And step 7 says, humbly ask God to remove these character defects. Now, there's some writings here in step 7 that I think are really, really important as to what I do. One, I say the 7-step prayer. That is part of my morning meditation. I say the 3rd step prayer and I say the 7th-step prayer, and I do readings from a lot of books. But there's some writings in here that are very, very important to me. Okay, and I think I have time for I really don't, because I want to get done by a little after 2. I'm going to go to write to some other things. Okay, it says on page 74 of the 12 and 12. One, it says this. I told you on page 72. It says the basic ingredient of all humility is a desire to seek and do God's will. Then on page 74, it says, when I have taken a square look at some of my defects, well, that's step 4. Have discussed them with another is step 5, and have become willing to have them removed, which is step 6. It says my thinking about humility commences to have a wider meaning. To seek and do God's will has a wider meaning. So how do I do that? How do you seek and do God's will? And it says on page 76, the last paragraph in the 12 and 12, it says the 7th step is where I make a change in my attitude, which permits me, with humility as my guide, this desire to seek and do God's will, to move out from myself towards others and towards God. How do you do that? How do I do that? We've come to believe in step 2 that God lives within. The great reality is found within. Okay? Has anybody here ever had this happen? Just nod your heads if you have. You're sitting in a meeting and you want a cup of coffee and you have a feeling, just a feeling, that you should ask the person next to you, do you want a cup of coffee, or pour coffee for the meeting? Has anybody, just by shaking your head, had that happen? Bunch of people going, yeah. Has anybody in this meeting ever gone to the supermarket and you have a basket full of stuff and a person gets in line behind you with 1 or 2 items, and you have this feeling like you should say to them, would you like to go in front of me? Anybody here ever have that feeling? Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Most of us, right? That is your higher power talking to you. That is God talking to you, saying, do this, be the person I want you to be. You'll get happiness out of it. I have that happen to me throughout the day. One of the worst times that I didn't do that, I didn't do it. And I wish it could be, because my sobriety, I can tell you this, it's amazing to me when I get asked to do these things and do the things I do in Alcoholics Anonymous, because my whole sobriety up to and including today has been 2 steps forward, 1 back. I don't walk on water. I don't work this perfectly. I don't do everything I'm telling you to do every single minute of every single day. Okay. My mom died May 22nd of last year. She had Alzheimer's and she was 91 years old. She had a great life. I cleaned up through the 9th step my relationship with her. She told me for years and years and years, that how close our relationship was, how much I loved her. She lived in Florida before she got sick, and while her and her husband were alive. We had them come out. We brought them out to visit us once or twice a year. We were back in Florida visiting them. We went out to see her every single year on her birthday in October. Every single year. April of this year, she died in May, I told you that. April of this year, God started banging on me. Remember I told you, listen to that voice within when you're in the supermarket? Somebody gets in behind you with 1 item and you get that feeling. Well, God gave me that feeling. He said, go visit your mom and do it now. I said, well, I don't want to pay for a ticket. I like to do them with a months in advance. I'm cheap. But she sounded great. I talked to her at least twice a week on the phone. My wife spoke to her at least once a week on the phone. My brother and sister both lived in Florida, or both her caregivers. And I called them and I said, hey, mom sounds really good, but I feel like I should come down there. I said, how's her health? I called my brother. I said, Michael, how's her health? She's doing great. I mean, her memory's getting a little bit worse, but otherwise she's doing great. She's as healthy as can possibly be. So I disregarded that voice within. And the next month she passed away. See, God was giving me an opportunity. He was banging on me saying, you want to see your mom one more time before I take her home? The more I learn to listen to that voice within, the more I come to believe that there's a higher power. If I just start to listen to that God within and do what he wants me to do, I have a life better than anything I ever could have imagined. And here I lost a chance to say goodbye. I lost a chance to say goodbye. But I try to the best of my ability to listen. I don't do it perfectly. I don't think any of us do. But I try to seek and do what God wants me to do. I try to move out from myself towards others. Another way to do that, if you're in a supermarket and you see a wagon just sitting in the middle of the parking lot and you get that feeling, move it back to, where they have all the shopping carts. That's God banging on you. Again, you're in a meeting. You get a feeling like you should talk to a newcomer, but then you want to go talk to your friend. That's God talking to you right there. Do it. What happens is you look in the mirror at the end of the day, you like what you see. So then I got to step 8, and step 8 tells me to make a list of everybody that I've harmed and become willing to make amends to all of these people. And I did. I was taught I make 3 lists. 1 is any financial amends. 2 are any people that I have hurt where I've done something wrong to them. And 3 is one that I didn't know for 8 or 9 years in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what I call sins of omission, or people that I've hurt emotionally. People I've hurt emotionally. That never entered my mind until I heard a speaker talk about it as I was sober. I was probably sober 8 or 9 years at the time. And he talked about hurting people emotionally. And by that time, we had 2 daughters. And I thought to myself, because my father-in-law and I hated each other. I mean, we had a mutual hatred society. First time I picked up his daughter, my father was a war hero. My father-in-law was a war hero. He fought under General Patton in World War II, and he was proud of it. And the first time I picked Ann up, it was a blind date. And I'm a hippie at that time. I got the long hair and the beads and the whole thing. And anyway, I go to pick her up. She's 16 years old. I'm 18 years old. I go to pick her up, and I get out of the car, and I am stoned out of my mind on whatever I was stoned on that night. And I go and I ring the bell, and he comes downstairs, this war hero. And there I am, completely smashed with faded army fatigues on that say, take LSD and see the world. So from that day on, we didn't get along. Let me guarantee you that. And, when my eldest daughter was born, as I told you, I was unemployed and unemployable. And, here's a man that worked 3 jobs to keep his family together. And he's got this unemployed bum as a son-in-law. So we don't get along at all, 0. But I also heard this guy talk about hurting people emotionally. And I thought, you know what? If either one of my daughters ever married a bum like me that dragged them through the mud the way I dragged him through the mud, they would sure owe me amends. So I wrote him a letter, and I dropped it in the mail. And I called him a few days later. I said, Sid, did you get my letter? He said, yeah, and F you, and he hung up on me. And because he still hated me, and it wasn't the way to do it. And I also had never done something that it talks about in our literature. You see, what I had never done is forgiven him. And it talks about making amends, and it says the first thing we need to do is forgive the other person. I never knew that. I thought I could just go, I could still think you're a rotten SOB, but here I am, Mr. AA, and I'll go make amends to you. That's no good. That don't count. And that's what happened with that relationship. Our relationship went from bad to worse, and I almost got drunk behind it. I don't have time to go through the whole story, but I almost got drunk behind it. He had come out for a visit, and he might not have got along with me, but I'll tell you what, that man was a better father and grandfather. I hope I'm half the father and grandfather that he was. He loved his kids, and he loved his grandkids, and he would do anything for them. And he came out for a visit, and what would happen during those years is I was a traveling salesperson at that time. This is 30-some-odd years ago. And he would say, I'm coming out on Sunday. Make sure Ron's out of the house. I'd go fly because I covered the whole West Coast. And I'd go somewhere, and I'd come home on Thursday nights. Well, this one time I came home, and he was there. And it got real, real ugly. And I almost got drunk behind it. But what happened is the next morning, I came home on a Thursday night. Friday morning, I thought I was going to, I knew I was going to get drunk because I was so angry that he was still in my house. This man that wanted me to stay out of the house, this man that hated me so much after me making amends and me trying to straighten out my life and buying his daughter houses and all kinds of stuff. How could he still hate me? I sent him this letter, blah, 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 blah. And I walked into my bedroom knowing I was going to get drunk, and I fell on my knees and I asked God for help. I said, God, please, I don't want to get drunk. I don't know what to do, but I'm so angry at him. Could you please help me? And God did me a favor I couldn't have done for myself. He gave me forgiveness towards him. I forgave him for his side of the relationship. And I walked out of that bedroom and I walked into the living room where he was watching TV. And I shut the TV off and I looked at him and I said, Sid, the war's over. I said, I love you, and you can be in our house as long as you want. And I said, I'll try to be the best son-in-law I know how to be to you. And it healed our relationship, but the forgiveness had to come first. And I had to go through my list and make amends to my mother, to my father, to the different people in my life. I had to pay back the money that I owed. With that, I'll tell you just a quick little story, and I'll use Kathy because I've known her for 25 years. If 25 years ago I borrowed $50 from Kathy and I never paid her back, I can't walk up to her and say, hey, Kathy, you remember that $50 I borrowed from you 25 years ago? And she says, I sure do, Ron. I said, well, I'm an Alcoholics Anonymous now, and I'm really sorry I didn't pay you the 50 back. And I walk away from her. That don't count. I got to pay her the money back. Well, how do I make amends to my parents? How do I make amends to my wife, to my kids, to the people that I've worked with in my life, to the people I've hurt that I haven't made amends to? And what I found out I have to do is go up to those people and ask their forgiveness in the 9th step. And then ask them, how do I make this up to you? And now I shut up and I listen. And I do what they ask me to do. And that takes me to step 10. And step 10 to me is a daily step. It started out, for me, it started out as looking at my stuff at the end of the day. And if I messed something up, I'd clean it up. Mess something up, I clean it up. Okay? And in recent times, through further reading, when I say recent times, maybe the last 6 or 8 months, something like that, I've come to find something out that is true for me, and I look at step 10 a lot differently today and a lot more as far as applying it right now. And what that is, I think any of us that are in any 12-step program for a long time have mostly cleared up our behaviors. Okay, so I don't have a lot of amends when I look at me at the end of the day, and I'll just pick Stephen H. from Houston because I see your name on here, that I've done something to you and I've got to go make amends, or done something to somebody else where I've got to go clean it up. But what our big book says in the 10th step, it says that I continue to take personal inventory. And then I make amends for what I've done. And it goes on in our big book to say this. It says in the 10th step that I've entered the world of the spirit. And it says the next thing I'm supposed to do is try to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So wherever I'm at, I've got to keep growing for the rest of my life. And then it says something that I missed for a long time. Okay. And what it says continue to watch for resentment, fear, self-centeredness, and dishonesty. And here's what I missed. It says, when these crop up, see what I thought it said for over 42 years in Alcoholics Anonymous was, if these crop up because I'm not working the 12 steps, or if these crop up because I get away from God, or if these crop up because I'm not working a good program, then I ask God to remove them. I talk it over with another person. I make amends. I turn my thoughts to someone else. That's not what it says. It says when these crop up. You see, because I found something out for me, and by a show of hands, we have a lot of people on this meeting, and I'm willing to guarantee this is true for most of us. I live up here. I live in my head. Okay? I've been looking at this for a long, long time, and I don't think this makes me working a bad program. I think it makes me being a human being. I have not gone, in all the time I've done this, 2 days in a row without some thought of resentment or somebody that annoys me or me wanting to play God again. I have not gone 2 days in a row without some fear, some self-centered thought, some dishonest thought. Not that I do it, but some resentment, fear, dishonesty popping in my head. And I thought to myself, how do I apply this so I don't have to go with that head? So I don't have to, I'm sure that I'm not the only one that has this, that drives somewhere and gets in a big fight with somebody in the car that's not there. I don't have to live that way, but I got to watch myself. And as soon as these pop into my head, I get some resentment. I've got to straighten out whatever, or some fear with my daughter that's out there doing her thing, or whatever. At once to ask God to remove it. At once to go back to step 6. And all of a sudden, I find out sometimes just how unmanageable my life is. Because like with my daughter, I'll say, wait a minute, God, I don't want to give up this concern. I don't want to just trust you. I got to handle this thing. What if you don't understand the problem the way I understand the problem? And now I'm stuck in the fear. So I've got to go back. Now, if just asking God to remove it doesn't remove it, the next thing I do is I call either my sponsor or somebody that's in my network, and I discuss it with them. If that doesn't remove it, what I do is, if need be, I make amends. So if I have a resentment thought against somebody, but I don't do anything about it, well, obviously I don't need to make amends. If I've done something, then I go make amends. Then I turn my thoughts to somebody I can help. That doesn't necessarily mean somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous or in a 12-step program. I just can I help somebody? Can I help a neighbor or whoever it is? I turn my thoughts to somebody else I can help. If none of that works, I write another 4th step on that issue. I go through the steps at depth again and again and again and again. So now I get to step 11. And step 11 says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as I understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for me and the power to carry that out. My second hero in Alcoholics Anonymous and good friend while he was alive was a guy that passed away more recently, a few years ago, a guy named Sandy Beach. Oh, yeah. And Sandy used to always say something. He'd say it to me one-on-one, and I've heard him say it in different talks. And what that is, and I agree with it, he'd always tell me, he'd say, Ron, become a seeker. Become a seeker of a better relationship with God. He'd always say, what it says in the 12 and 12, that our libraries are treasure troves of information. Keep reading, keep trying to go further and trying to increase your knowledge, your relationship with a higher power. And I believe that that's the truth. And the other important word to me in the 11th step is to improve. In other words, as far as I'm concerned, as long as I'm alive, I'll never work a perfect program. I really won't, because I'm a human being. But I try to improve. The things I've talked to you this afternoon about are things that I do at 43 years or so, where I would have never thought about these things at 2 years of sobriety. I try to improve. Hopefully, if you get me back doing this again 2 years from now, I'm talking about something else, because I've gone further in the steps. It says the final part of step 11, I had that confused also. I thought the purpose of step 11 for a long time in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous was the beginning of it. Sought through prayer and meditation, okay? Praying and meditating, sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God. My sponsor, Bob, said something to me years ago. He said, your relationship with a higher power is the same as any other relationship. He said, Ron, you and I have a good relationship. If we get up from here and we go to a meeting, do you talk to me in the car? I said, sure. He said, that improves our relationship, doesn't it? I said, yeah. He said, if you didn't talk to me for 5 years, would we still have a relationship? Would we still be friends? Would we still know each other? I said, of course. He said, but our relationship wouldn't be as good. I said, that's fair. He said, talk to God as often as you can. To me, prayer is talking to God. Meditation is trying to listen to that voice within. There's tons of books we can read on that. But I think the most important part of step 11 for me today is the last part, praying only for knowledge of his will for me and the power to carry that out. How do I do what God wants me to do? Yvonne called me. Yes. The answer is yes. I do what you ask me to do, not only in the program, but I try to do it outside of the program. And then step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening. I've had a spiritual awakening. I came here, I never said a prayer in my life. And today, the most important relationship in my life is my relationship with the God of my understanding through 12 steps and through folks like you. Okay, because you guys came before anything. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, I try to carry this message, not some message or this message, which is a spiritual awakening, which allows an alcoholic or a person from another 12-step program to live comfortably in his or her skin so we don't have to pick up another drink, and to practice these principles. Practice these principles in all our affairs. I don't remember if I said this in the beginning, but I'll close with it. Dr. Bob said this. We wrote the steps in the beginning, and we had the Olympics in 1935. And he said, we thought well and long before we used the word practice, but we did. And the reason that we did, the person that won the gold medal in our recent Olympics was better at it when they won the gold medal than they were when they first jumped into the pool. So I practice these principles to the best of my ability. As I said, my whole sobriety has been 2 steps forward, 1 back. But I do the best I can, and I try to share that with you. So, Yvonne, thanks for asking me. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And I guess we'll open this to questions and answers, right?
Yep.